My name is Elias Thorne, and I used to believe that the silence of the North Dakota plains was a gift. But now I know that silence is just a shroud for the things we are too broken to scream. They say time heals all wounds, but they never tell you that some wounds are carved so deep that time only serves to rust the blade still stuck inside you. If you're listening to this, maybe you felt it too, that moment when your entire world shifts on its axis and you're left clutching at shadows, wondering how a person can be standing right in front of you and yet be 1,000 miles away. It started on a Tuesday, a day so mundane it should have been forgotten. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with the threat of a storm that never quite broke. I was sitting in my small, cluttered office at the back of the hardware store I'd owned for 15 years. The smell of sawdust and WD-40 usually calmed me, but that afternoon, the air felt thin. My wife, Sarah, though back then she was just the woman who made my heart beat in a rhythm I didn't deserve, walked in with a look on her face that I still see every time I close my eyes. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was a terrifying kind of emptiness, like a house that had been suddenly vacated in the middle of the night. She didn't say a word at first. She just stood there, her hands trembling as she held a single, crumpled envelope. We had been married for 12 years, through the lean winters and the golden summers, through the failed attempts at starting a family and the quiet joys of building a life from nothing. I thought I knew every line on her face, every secret hidden in the amber of her eyes, but in that moment she was a stranger. "Elias," she whispered, and her voice sounded like dry leaves skittering across a driveway. "He's back, he found me." The world didn't stop, though it felt like it should have. Outside, a truck rumbled past and the bell above the shop door chimed as a customer walked in looking for a specific type of bolt. I didn't move, I couldn't. The he she was referring to was a ghost from a life she had buried long before I ever met her. A life in the neon-soaked streets of Chicago, far away from our quiet prairie town. A life she had fled in the dead of night with nothing but a bruised rib and a heart full of glass. Julian Vane, the name alone felt like a curse. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floorboards. I took her hands in mine, they were ice cold. "Sarah, look at me," I said, trying to anchor her. "Nobody can hurt you here, we have a life here, we have friends, we have the law, we have." My voice trailed off because I saw the fear in her eyes, and it was a fear that no local sheriff or deadbolt could fix. It was the fear of a predator who doesn't care about boundaries. For the next 3 days, we lived in a state of high alert paralysis. We stopped going to the store, we locked the gates, we jumped at the sound of the wind rattling the siding of our farmhouse. Sarah barely ate, her eyes constantly darting toward the long, gravel driveway that wound through the cornfields. I tried to be the protector, the stoic husband who could handle anything, but inside I was crumbling. I realized then that our peace had been a fragile thing built on the assumption that the past stays dead. But the past doesn't die, it just waits for the right moment to exhume itself. On the 4th night, the phone rang. It wasn't the house phone, but a burner phone that had been left in our mailbox that morning. I picked it up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. There was no greeting. Just a low, melodic hum followed by a voice that sounded like silk dragged over gravel. "Elias Thorne," the voice said, "you have something that belongs to me, you've been taking care of it and I appreciate the maintenance, but the lease is up." I felt a surge of cold fury. "If you come near this property, I will end you," I hissed, my voice shaking with a cocktail of rage and terror. Julian laughed. It was a soft, genuine sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Elias, you're a builder, you make things. You don't break them, but me, I'm an architect of ruin. I don't need to come to your house, I'm already inside your head. Tell Sarah I saw the blue dress she wore to the grocery store yesterday. It suits her, almost hides the paleness." He hung up. I looked at Sarah, who was watching me from the kitchen doorway, her silhouette thin and fragile. I didn't tell her what he said. I couldn't. How do you tell the person you love that the monster is watching them from the shadows of their own everyday life? That night, I sat by the window with a shotgun across my lap, watching the moon crawl across the sky. I realized that my quiet, simple life was over. The man I was, the man who fixed things and planted gardens, was dying. To save her, I would have to become someone else, someone I had spent my whole life trying not to be. The next morning, I did something I promised I would never do. I dug up a floorboard in the tool shed, reaching deep into the dirt until my fingers brushed against a heavy, oilcloth-wrapped bundle. It had been there for 20 years, a relic from a version of me that Sarah didn't know existed. Long before the hardware store, long before the piece of North Dakota, I had my own shadows. I had a different name and a different set of skills. As I unwrapped the cold steel of the Beretta, I felt a familiar, sickening weight settle in my gut. I walked back into the house and Sarah was standing by the stove, staring at a pot of water that had long since boiled dry. She looked at the gun in my hand, then up at my face. She didn't scream, she didn't even look surprised. She just nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting for this version of me to finally show up. "Where are you going?" she asked. "I'm going to finish this," I replied, "before he finishes us." But as I stepped out onto the porch, the air felt different. The birds had stopped singing, and there, sitting on the hood of my truck, was a single red rose, its petals already turning black at the edges. A note was pinned to it. "The game is called The Long Walk Home, Elias. Let's see how far you can go before you fall." I knew then that this wasn't just a threat, this was an invitation to a slaughter. Julian didn't just want her back, he wanted to destroy the man she had become for me. He wanted to prove that no matter how much paint you put on a rusted soul, the decay always wins. I got into the truck, the engine roaring to life like a hungry beast, and I drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew the hunt had begun. And in this game, there would be no winners, only survivors and the buried. The gravel crunched under my tires like grinding teeth as I drove away from the farmhouse. Every fiber of my being wanted to turn around, to go back and lock Sarah in my arms, but I knew my presence there was a lightning rod. To protect her, I had to move. Julian Vane wasn't a man who kicked down doors, he was a man who picked at the scabs of your life until you bled out. He wanted me out in the open, away from my fortress of normalcy. I pulled into the parking lot of a derelict motel on the edge of the county line, a place where the neon sign hummed with a dying buzz and the air tasted of stale cigarettes and regret. I checked into a room under a name I hadn't used in 2 decades, Leo Vance. It felt like putting on an old, blood-stained coat that somehow still fit perfectly. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, the Beretta disassembled on the nightstand. My hands were steady, a terrifying muscle memory taking over. I wasn't Elias the hardware store owner anymore. I was a ghost returning to the graveyard. The burner phone chirped, a text message. No words, just a GPS coordinate and a timestamp, midnight. The coordinates pointed to an abandoned grain elevator 10 miles out into the flats. It was a cathedral of concrete and rust, towering over the landscape like a tombstone. I spent the remaining hours of daylight preparing. I didn't just bring a gun, I brought a lifetime of suppressed instinct. I scouted the perimeter of the elevator from a distance using binoculars. No cars, no movement, just the wind whistling through the hollow structures. Julian was a predator, but he was also a performer. He wanted an audience for his cruelty. As midnight approached, the sky turned a pitch black that seemed to swallow the light of my headlights. I parked a mile away and walked the rest of the distance, moving through the tall grass like a shadow. My heart was a steady drum, cold and rhythmic. When I reached the base of the elevator, the heavy steel door was slightly ajar, groaning on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying wheat. A single industrial light flickered high above, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. I knew you still had it in you, Leo, a voice echoed from the darkness. It wasn't coming from one spot, it was bouncing off the concrete, making Julian sound like he was everywhere at once. The way you move. It's not the walk of a man who sells hammers and nails, it's the stride of a man who knows exactly how much pressure it takes to snap a collarbone. Show yourself, Julian, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the fear he fed on. You wanted me here. I'm here, leave Sarah out of this. A soft chuckle drifted down from a metal catwalk 30 feet above. Leave her out, Elias, she is the prize, she's the only beautiful thing you ever touched and you thought you could keep her. A girl like that doesn't belong in a farmhouse with a man who smells like sawdust. She belongs in the fire, my fire. Suddenly, a series of lights clicked on, illuminating the center of the floor. There, tied to a wooden chair, was a figure with a hood over their head. My breath hitched. Sarah, I took a step forward, my gun raised. Careful now, Julian warned, stepping out into the light on the catwalk. He looked exactly as I remembered him from the old photos Sarah had hidden, sharp features, eyes like polished flint, and a smile that never reached them. He held a remote in his hand. Pressure plate under the chair. You move too fast or you fire that toy of yours and our lovely Sarah becomes a memory. I froze, the coldness in my gut turned to ice. What do you want? I want to see if you're still the man they whispered about in the Chicago underground, Julian said, leaning over the rail. I want to see if the fixer can fix a situation where every choice leads to a funeral. You see, Elias or Leo, whichever lie you prefer, I don't just want to kill you, I want you to watch as everything you built turns to ash. I want you to realize that you were never her savior, you were just her hiding spot, and I've found her. He tossed something down, it landed with a heavy thud at my feet. It was my wedding ring, he must have taken it from the house while I was at the motel. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He had been in my home while I was preparing for a war he had already started. She's not here, is she? I whispered, looking at the hooded figure. Julian's grin widened. He pressed a button and the hood was pulled back by a wire. It wasn't Sarah. It was a mannequin dressed in her favorite blue dress, its plastic face painted with a grotesque, mocking smile. She's currently enjoying a very long, very forced drive toward the coast, Julian said, his voice dropping to a hiss. While you were playing soldier in the dirt, my people were taking what belongs to me. This was just to see if you'd show up. To see if you'd choose the gun over her safety. And you did, Elias, you left her alone, you chose the hunt. The rage that exploded in me was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't a hot, blinding anger, it was a cold, surgical strike. I didn't hesitate. I fired, not at Julian but at the light fixture above his head. The bulb shattered, plunging the catwalk into darkness. I heard him curse, the sound of his boots scrambling on the metal. I moved. I wasn't a man anymore, I was a machine of vengeance. I climbed the service ladder in total silence, my lungs burning, my mind focused on one thing, getting the location of that car. Julian fired blindly into the dark, the muzzle flashes lighting up the room like strobe lights. Flash, he was near the grain chute. Flash, he was moving toward the emergency exit. I intercepted him near the top landing. I tackled him, the force of our impact sending us crashing into a stack of old wooden crates. We tumbled across the floor, a blur of fists and teeth. Julian was younger, faster, but I was fueled by a desperation that bordered on insanity. I jammed my thumb into the wound I'd managed to open on his shoulder and he howled, dropping the remote. I pinned him against the cold concrete, the barrel of my Beretta pressed hard under his chin. Where is she? I growled, my voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a grave. Julian spat blood into my face, his eyes wide with a manic sort of joy. You're finally here, he wheezed. The man she was afraid of, the man she never told you about. Look at you, you're not saving her, Elias. You're becoming the reason she ran in the first place. "Where is she?" I pressed the gun harder, feeling the bone give way slightly. "Check the glove box of your truck," he whispered, a dark trail of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. "I left you a map, but hurry, Elias, the car she's in, it doesn't have much oxygen left, and the driver, he's not as patient as I am." I realized then that Julian hadn't come here to win, he had come here to break me. He knew I would kill him and he didn't care. He was a martyr for his own twisted obsession. I didn't give him the satisfaction of another word. I pulled the trigger. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood up, my clothes soaked in sweat and blood, and looked down at the man who had destroyed my peace. I felt nothing, no relief, no victory, just a hollow, echoing void. I turned and ran, my heart screaming Sarah's name, knowing that the real nightmare was only just beginning. I didn't wait to see the light fade from Julian's eyes. I was already sprinting down the service stairs, my boots clattering against the metal like a frantic heartbeat. Every second was a grain of sand slipping through a glass I couldn't turn over. I reached my truck, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I lunged for the glove box and tore it open. Inside sat a small, black GPS device and a Polaroid photo. My heart stopped. It was Sarah, gagged and bound, tucked into the trunk of a car I recognized, her own silver sedan. On the back of the photo, written in elegant, mocking script, were the words, "Breathe slow, Sarah. The end is a quiet place." I punched the coordinates from the GPS into my phone. It led to the Blackwood Quarry, an old, flooded limestone pit 30 miles north. The pit was hundreds of feet deep, filled with turquoise water that hid a graveyard of rusted machinery and secrets. My stomach churned. Julian didn't just want her dead, he wanted her erased. I drove like a man possessed. The speedometer needle climbed past 90, then 100. The flat plains of North Dakota blurred into a gray streak of nothingness. I wasn't thinking about the law or the hardware store or the life I had meticulously crafted. I was thinking about the first time I met Sarah at a diner in Fargo. She had been spilling coffee on her apron, laughing at her own clumsiness, and I remember thinking that her laugh was the only thing in this world that made sense. If that laugh went silent, I knew I would never find my way out of the dark again. As I neared the quarry, I saw the tire tracks, fresh ruts in the soft mud leading toward the edge of the cliff. I slammed on the brakes, my truck skidding to a halt just yards from the precipice. In the distance, silhouetted against the rising moon, I saw it. The silver sedan was perched at the very edge of the rock, its rear wheels spinning fruitlessly in the dirt as it teetered on the brink. A man stood by the driver's side door, a tall, skeletal figure I didn't recognize, one of Julian's hired shadows. He held a heavy rock in his hands, ready to smash the window or perhaps just give the car the final shove it needed. "Get away from the car," I screamed, leaping out of the truck with my Beretta leveled at his chest. The man didn't flinch. He looked at me with a hollow, vacant stare. "Julian said you'd be fast. He didn't say you'd be this late." He dropped the rock and reached for a lever he had rigged to the front axle of the car. I fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around, but his weight had already slumped against the lever. With a sickening, metallic groan, the car began to slide. "Sarah!" I lunged forward, discarding the gun, my fingers clawing at the air. The sedan tipped. For a heartbeat, it hung there, balanced between the earth and the abyss. I reached the bumper just as the gravity won. I grabbed the cold metal, my muscles screaming as I tried to anchor the 2-ton machine with nothing but my own desperation. My boots slid through the mud, inching closer to the drop. I could hear Sarah thumping against the inside of the trunk, a muffled, rhythmic sound of terror that tore through my soul. "I've got you, Sarah, I've got you," I roared, my vision tunneling. The car shifted, the weight pulling me toward the edge. I was losing. My feet hit the lip of the quarry. One more inch and we were both going down into the freezing, dark water. With a burst of adrenaline that felt like fire in my veins, I threw my body weight backward, wedging my legs against a solid limestone outcrop. I held on until my palms bled, until my shoulders felt like they were being pulled from their sockets. Slowly, agonizingly, I felt the slide stop. I didn't breathe, I didn't move. I stayed there, a human anchor for what felt like hours but was likely only seconds. I managed to reach around with one hand and find the emergency trunk release through a gap in the crumpled rear fender. The trunk popped open. Sarah scrambled out, her eyes wide and bloodshot, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She collapsed onto the mud, gasping for air. I didn't let go of the car until I was sure she was clear. As soon as I released my grip, the sedan gave a final, mournful creak and vanished over the edge. A few seconds later, a dull splash echoed up from the depths. I crawled over to her, pulling her into my lap. We sat there in the mud, two broken people under a vast, uncaring sky. She was shaking so hard I thought she might break. "It's okay," I whispered into her hair over and over. "It's over, he's gone." "They're all gone," but even as I said the words, I felt the lie sticking in my throat. We were alive, yes, but the Elias Thorne who lived in the farmhouse was dead. The man holding her now was Leo Vance, a man who had killed in the dark and who had the blood of the past all over his hands. Sarah pulled back, looking at me, really looking at me, and I saw the shift in her eyes. She saw the gun. She saw the cold, hard set of my jaw. She saw the man Julian said I was. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm here," I said, but we both knew it wasn't the whole truth. The sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the quarry in shades of violent orange and gold. We stood up, leaning on each other, and walked back toward the truck. As we drove away from the site of our near execution, I looked in the rearview mirror. The man I had shot was gone, either crawled away or fallen into the pit. It didn't matter. The silence had returned to the plains, but it wasn't the gift it used to be. It was heavy. It was a weight we would have to carry every day for the rest of our lives. We drove in silence for a long time. The heater in the truck hummed, trying to chase away a chill that went deeper than skin. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Where do we go now?" "We can't go back home, can we?" I looked at the road ahead, stretching out into an uncertain future. "No," I said softly. "The farmhouse is just a building now. We have to find a place where the shadows can't find us." But in my heart, I knew. Julian had won a part of the war. He had forced us out of the light. Now we were just two more ghosts wandering the highway, looking for a peace that might no longer exist for people like us. We drove for 3 days, stopping only for gas and the kind of cheap coffee that burns your throat and keeps the memories at bay. We crossed state lines like criminals, though we were the victims of a crime the world would never truly understand. The North Dakota plates were swapped for stolen ones in a dusty lot outside of Omaha. I didn't look Sarah in the eye when I did it. I didn't want her to see how easy the deception came to me. We settled in a small, nameless town in the Ozarks, a place where the trees are so thick they seem to swallow the light, and the people are practiced in the art of minding their own business. We rented a cabin that smelled of cedar and damp earth, tucked away at the end of a winding dirt road. It was beautiful in a haunted sort of way. But as the weeks bled into months, the physical distance we had put between us and Julian Vane's ghost didn't seem to matter. The farmhouse was gone, but the fear had moved into the marrow of our bones. Sarah wasn't the same. The woman who used to hum while she gardened was replaced by a shadow who sat by the window, staring at the tree line until the sun went down. She didn't scream in her sleep anymore. That would have been a relief. Instead, she would wake up in the middle of the night, perfectly still, her eyes wide open, listening to the house settle. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep, every rustle of the wind was a whisper. "I can still feel him, Elias," she said one evening. We were sitting on the porch, the air thick with the sound of cicadas. It doesn't matter how many locks you put on that door, he's not outside. He's in the way I breathe. He's in the way you look at the woods every time a branch snaps. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, not out of malice, but out of a strange, new fragility. I did what I had to do to keep you safe, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to me. I know, she whispered. But who is going to keep me safe from what you became to save me? That was the poison Julian had left behind. He hadn't just tried to kill us, he had tainted the very well of our love. I was no longer the man who fixed things. I was the man who had a Beretta under the mattress and a kill count in his past. Every time I touched her, I wondered if she felt the blood on my hands. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman I had pulled from the edge of a cliff, and I realized I had saved her life but lost her soul. One afternoon, I returned from the local town with supplies to find a black SUV parked at the base of our driveway. My heart didn't race, it turned into a cold stone. I drew the pistol from my waistband before I even killed the engine. I approached the vehicle, my boots silent on the pine needles. The driver's window rolled down slowly. It wasn't one of Julian's men. It was a man in a well-tailored suit, his hair silvered at the temples, looking entirely out of place in the rugged wilderness. He looked at my gun with an expression of bored curiosity. "Mr. Vance," he said, using the name I had buried, "or do you prefer Mr. Thorne today? It's hard to keep track of a man who dies so often. Who are you?" I demanded, the barrel of the gun inches from his temple. "A messenger," he replied calmly. Julian Vane was a chaotic element, a man of high theater and low impulse. My employers didn't care for his methods, but they did admire his target. "You see, Leah, when you killed Julian in that grain elevator, you didn't just end a stalker, you inherited a debt." My blood ran cold. "I don't owe anyone anything." The man smiled, a thin, surgical line. Julian was working for a collective that invested heavily in his acquisitions. Sarah was more than just an obsession to him. She was a piece of leverage he stole from the wrong people in Chicago. By taking her and then by taking his life, you've interrupted a very expensive chain of custody. We don't want your life, Mr. Thorne. We want the information Sarah's father left her, the information Julian was trying to squeeze out of her before you played the hero. I looked toward the cabin. Sarah was standing on the porch watching us. She looked so small against the backdrop of the towering pines. "She doesn't know anything," I said. "She ran away from that life for a reason. She may not know she knows it," the messenger said, handing me a heavy, wax-sealed envelope. "But the people I represent are very patient, and unlike Julian, we don't care about the drama. We just want the ledger. You have 48 hours to find out what she's hiding. If you don't, well, North Dakota was a very quiet place. It would be a shame if the Ozarks became quite the opposite." He rolled up the window and drove away, leaving a plume of dust that hung in the humid air. I stood there, the envelope heavy in my hand, feeling the walls of the world closing in again. I realized then that there was no such thing as a clean break. The past is a predator that doesn't hunt for food, it hunts for the debt you forgot you owed. I walked up to the porch. Sarah was waiting, her face pale. "Who was that?" I looked at her, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something other than love. It was suspicion. It was the realization that even in our most intimate moments, there were rooms in her heart I had never been allowed to enter. Julian hadn't been chasing her just because he was a monster. He was chasing her because of a secret she had carried into our marriage like a ticking time bomb. "We need to talk, Sarah," I said, my voice hard. "And this time, I need the whole truth. Not the version you told the hardware store owner, the version you owe the man who killed for you." She looked at the envelope in my hand and her knees buckled. I caught her, but it didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like a capture. As I carried her inside, the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows of the Ozarks stretched out to claim us once more. We were no longer running from a madman. We were running from the truth, and the truth has a way of catching up no matter how fast you drive. The cabin felt smaller that night, the walls pressing in as the lantern light flickered against the logs. Sarah sat at the small wooden table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. I laid the envelope between us. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was heavy with the weight of 12 years of omissions. "My father wasn't just a gambler, Elias," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "He was a bookkeeper for the Vane family in Chicago. Before he died, he gave me a locket. He told me it was a memento, but inside was a microfilm, a ledger of every bribe, every payoff, and every offshore account the syndicate used to buy the city." I felt a cold shiver. And Julian didn't just want me. He wanted the ledger to overthrow his own father. I thought if I ran far enough, if I changed my name and married a good man in a quiet town, the world would forget I existed. I thought I could bury the girl I was. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "But then I met you, and I loved you so much that I convinced myself the lie was the truth. I looked at the woman I had sacrificed everything for. The anger I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was only a profound, soul-crushing sadness. We had built our house on sand, and the tide had finally come for us. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single photo of our farmhouse back in North Dakota, burned to the ground. A warning. "They won't stop, Sarah," I said. "The man in the suit, the syndicate, they aren't like Julian. They don't want to play games. They want the ledger, and once they have it, we are loose ends." "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at the Beretta on the table. I looked at the GPS device. Then I looked at her. "We stop running. If they want the fixer, I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for, but not on their terms." The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated movement. I didn't go to the meeting point. Instead, I used the last of our savings to buy high-grade explosives from a mining contact I'd made in the hills. I knew the syndicate would be watching the cabin, so we didn't leave through the front. We used the old storm cellar that led to a ravine behind the property. I sent Sarah to a safe house, a place even I didn't know the exact location of, arranged through an old contact from my previous life who owed me a final favor. "Wait for me at the Greyhound station in St. Louis in 3 days, I told her. "If I'm not there, take the secondary envelope in your bag and go to the authorities, give them the ledger, end it." She kissed me then, a desperate, salty kiss that tasted of endings. "Come back to me, Elias, not Leo, Elias." I watched her vanish into the dark, then I turned back toward the cabin. I spent the night rigging the place. Every floorboard, every window frame, every door. I turned our sanctuary into a death trap. I sat on the porch as the sun began to rise on the third day, the black SUV appearing at the base of the drive right on time. This time there were 3 of them. The messenger and 2 professional-looking men with the cold eyes of career killers. They walked up the drive with the confidence of men who think they hold all the cards. I stood up holding a small metal cylinder in my hand. "Do you have it?" the messenger asked, his voice smooth as silk. "I have something better," I said. "I have a deal. You leave her alone. You erase our names from every file, every memory, every debt. In exchange, I don't press this button." The messenger laughed. "You think a few pounds of C4 scares us? We have teams in 5 states, Leo. You can't kill us all." "I don't need to kill you all," I replied, my thumb hovering over the detonator. "I just need to kill the secret. The ledger is inside this house. It's wired to the primary charge. If this cabin goes, the only evidence that can bring down your employers goes with it. You'll go back to Chicago empty-handed, and we both know what they do to people who fail." The messenger's smile vanished. He looked at the cabin, then at the detonator in my hand. He saw the truth in my eyes, that I was a man with nothing left to lose, and those are the most dangerous men on earth. "You're bluffing," he hissed. "Try me," I said. For a long minute, the only sound was the wind through the pines. Then the messenger signaled to his men. They backed away. You think you've won, don't you? You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. I've been doing that for 12 years, I said. At least now I'll know what I'm looking for. They got into the SUV and backed down the drive. I waited until the sound of their engine faded into the distance. I didn't drop the detonator. I walked inside, took one last look at the life we had tried to build, and then I walked out the back. I didn't blow the house, not yet. I needed them to think the ledger was still there, a dormant threat kept in check by a silent agreement. I made it to St. Louis on the third day. The station was crowded, smelling of diesel and tired travelers. I stood by the lockers, my heart in my throat. Then I saw her. She was sitting on a bench, wearing a nondescript coat, looking at the floor. I walked up to her and sat down. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and took her hand. She flinched for a second, then recognized my touch. She turned to me, and the look of pure, unadulterated relief in her eyes was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For now," I said. "We're ghosts now, Sarah. No names, no past, no home, just us. That's all I ever wanted," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. We boarded a bus heading west. As the city lights faded behind us, I looked at our reflection in the dark window. We looked like any other couple, tired and worn by the world. No one would ever know the blood we had spilled or the secrets we carried. Julian Vane was a memory. The syndicate was a shadow in the rearview mirror. I don't know if we'll ever truly be safe. I don't know if the silence will ever feel like a gift again. But as the bus roared down the interstate, I realized that maybe love isn't about finding a quiet place to hide. Maybe it's about finding the person you're willing to walk through the fire with, and knowing that even if you come out scarred and broken, at least you're not walking alone. My name is Elias Thorne, or maybe it's not. It doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is the hand in mine and the road ahead. The long walk home has finally ended.